the internet is pretty much the only source, the only area where musicians, and I hesitate to use the word musicians because, of course, they're all musicians, but musicians don't need lawyers. Musicians just need gigs. So that's why I think in terms of musicians as composers, recording artists, or performers, which are areas where I handle. I help them. I help them in all other areas. When I'm representing artists, they have the same type of legal problems anybody else does, so I do some of that too. But as far as jazz artists are concerned, are we dealing primarily with a jazz audience here?
We are. This is being broadcast on the Jazz Video Guide channel, so yes, we are dealing with the jazz audience.
All right. Well, there's not that much difference between a jazz artist and a pop artist, except maybe a few $1 million a year. But the mechanics, the system is basically the same. And as we know, there's not much interest from major labels in so-called jazz artists. Remember, jazz is an instrumental art form, and so is accessible to far fewer people than even blues, which is basically a vocal art form. So since there are so many major artists, Herbie Hancock and Keith Jarrett and Sonny Rollins and so many other people don't have record deals anymore. They just make their own records, and what the internet provides is direct access to a fan base. People these days, fans don't really want to hear from press agents or managers. They want to hear from the artist directly. So that the internet does provide an opportunity to reach an audience. However, one of the big problems is that there are millions of websites and no real way to make yourself known unless you're using Facebook or another iTunes or another mass appeal website. So basically, but you think of music on the web and you think immediately of Spotify and iTunes and some of the other music sites. And people then people say, well, why can't musicians or performers make money from these sites? Remember that those sites overwhelmingly make use of phonograph records. They don't have live performances on them. So somebody who's made a record has made a record pursuant to a contract with a record company, has given the record company all the rights. So musicians complain they don't make any money from Spotify. Well, they don't own anything on Spotify. Spotify is a site that plays records, and they pay money to record companies. Now, it is true that the artist, and I use these words advisedly, I don't say musician, I say artist, wears two hats as far as his recording contract is concerned. One is that he's the recording artist, he's the singer or the performer, the player, the featured player. Sidemen have no rights at all in these things because they just got a salary as an employee and they get paid and they move off. It's the featured people who are theoretically at least entitled to a royalty. That's for their performance, and that royalty is determined as is provided in the record company contract. And in most cases, the royalty, if it exists at all, is minimal. First of all, most of these contracts long predated the internet, so they didn't mention anything like that. They just said all other uses hereafter to come into existence. So the royalties paid by Spotify or iTunes, which in the case of iTunes are fairly substantial. When you buy an iTunes download for 99 cents, 65 to 70% of that goes to the record company. iTunes doesn't really make a lot of money on selling music on the internet, but they sell a lot of machines, obviously, and they're in the hardware business, not the software business. So 70 cents of that 99 cents goes to the record label, and the record label theoretically splits it up among the artist and the music publisher. Now, that's the other hat that the artist is wearing. As composer, the artist is not always a composer. I mean, most jazz is done standards. Keith Jarrett hasn't recorded the original composition in 30 years. So the owner of the rights in that musical composition is called the music publisher, who may or may not be the artist himself. So that there are two ways for an artist / composer to make money from the internet, especially from iTunes, and the artist royalty that they will get will be, as is determined in their record contract, the same royalty they would get from a sale of a record, which in most cases is very small for various reasons we won't go into. The other royalty, however, is the music publishing royalty, and that is determined by statutory law, and that could be as much as 9.1 cents per composition for the split among the publisher and the writer, and if the artist / composer is one and the same, he'd get 9.1 cents per iTunes composition. I can tell you, on the basis of royalty statements that I received from some of my clients, like the Thelonious Monk estate and Billy Taylor's music publishing company, that the so-called digital royalties payable by the record company, and most record companies do pay them, can be substantial, so that there are ways to make money from iTunes. Spotify is different. It's a streaming site, meaning that nobody downloads anything. It is just streamed. It's like a radio program on the internet. So instead of 9.1 cents, what is payable in most cases is 1 penny. So obviously that's very small. It's payable only to the performer, and so generates very little in the way of money. But this is a new art form. When the U.S. copyright law originally, the modern U.S. copyright law originally passed in 1909, what we call the mechanical royalty, the royalty paid for mechanical reproduction of musical compositions, which at that point was piano rolls, was 2 cents. Now it's 9.1 cents. It's going to be going up again. So the fact that a royalty exists is significant. The fact that it is a very small royalty is a fact of life which usually comes into effect when something is brand new. We hope that over the years that royalty will increase. So those are the two basic sources of income for a composer artist on the internet, as opposed to sites like this where you have some some commercials, some opportunity to share money in that regard. There are live video concerts, of course. There are DVDs. There are a lot of digital outlets for an artist / composer to generate income. But I've always said that the best part of the music business is music publishing. In other words, the ownership of musical compositions. Always say Herbie Hancock will make a lot more money in the long run from Watermelon Man than he'll make from the Headhunters or any records that he has made, with very few of which are still even available. Billy Taylor wrote a composition, I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, which is a jazz standard, but it's a jazz standard with lyrics, and it is has become very, very popular, been recorded over 100 times, and the total income generated by that composition between motion picture uses and Coca-Cola commercials and whatever is a healthy 7 figures.